Constitutional Conversations is a series of discussions by America's leading scholars about the principles, framing, ratification, and implementation of constitutional government in the United States. This series is hosted by the James Madison Memorial Fellowship Foundation of Alexandria, Virginia.
It occurs to me that Americans, for the most part, were skeptical of the French Enlightenment principles that very quickly are instantiated in their own revolution in France, and which becomes bloody and violent and excessive in ways the American Enlightenment never did become. So what is Montesquieu's relationship to the French Enlightenment, to the Enlightenment as a whole? Is he a philosophe like some of the other more radical thinkers? And why are Americans comfortable with him when they seem not to be so comfortable with the more radical elements of the French Enlightenment?
The American founders at the time do think of him as an Enlightenment figure, a philosophe, as you said. Scholars, French citizens today who are proud of Montesquieu and what he has brought to the world refer to him as a philosophe. At the end of his life, Montesquieu contributed to the great Enlightenment philosophy project of the Encyclopedia, the French Encyclopedia. He writes an article. He was famous for an earlier work he wrote in the 1720s. It was actually the first philosophical novel. It's called Persian Letters. And the fact that a nobleman, a senior judge in a court and a baron would write such a thoughtful but somewhat scandalous account of European politics and the monarchy, that made him famous. And then he becomes famous for this encyclopedic, comprehensive book, The Spirit of Laws, which really cemented his status not just as an intellectual, but a philosopher of the high rank among modern philosophers. He's the equivalent of a Hobbes or a Locke or a Spinoza. And in his intellectual merit and engagement with the issues of the Enlightenment, he's the equivalent or the peer of a Voltaire. We know that Rousseau reads him very carefully, and Rousseau takes some ideas for his own, I would argue, more radical philosophy from Montesquieu. And actually, to be honest, it's probably one reason over the centuries we don't pay as much attention to Montesquieu as the American framers did, because he was a sort of blend of what we would call liberal and conservative. He did have some more, let's say, progressive or liberal elements. As I was mentioning, here's high nobility, a baron, interested in liberty and interested in reforming constitutions, interested in principles of natural right and justice for all human beings. And so that seems like it's more progressive and maybe radical, but he's so careful to be balanced. We can talk more about this. He has a principle of moderation, of balance, explicitly in his philosophy. So this makes him safer in a certain way and more useful and adaptable to broader political communities that might be interested in reading him. So we probably, it's fair to say, have university communities in America that over centuries have become more dominated by the more progressive and let's say the left side of the intellectual perspective. In some way, maybe more of the children of the French Revolution, impatient for reform. And while Montesquieu was celebrated at the time of the French Revolution, he was thought to be inspirational in France for the idea of reforming the monarchy. That early idea of the revolution itself, of reforming the monarchy, as you mentioned, fell away toward the idea of repudiating the monarchy. And then Montesquieu's own stock within France fell. And even figures like Jefferson in the United States, who were, at one time, early in his life, Jefferson was very deeply influenced by Montesquieu, praised Montesquieu. The later Jefferson, after the French Revolution, begins to take more of this more radical French view that, well, Montesquieu was much too friendly to aristocracy, and he was much too friendly to monarchy, and he was much too friendly to gradual reform rather than radical replacement of unjust modes of politics. So as I was saying, this is why scholars often refer to Montesquieu now as part of the moderate Enlightenment. He's clearly a modern. He's clearly, while very knowledgeable about classical and medieval thought and the Christian tradition, he's clearly this modern, more liberal figure, an Enlightenment figure looking to spread ideas of justice and political reform to all peoples and all political ranks and orders. But he does it in this complicated, more balanced way that is aware of philosophy and new ideas of philosophy may be going too far